Um, Welcome everybody. My name is Scott McBride. I'm with Bolton and Mank. And the first thing I should probably do is thank you for spending one of your precious summer evenings with us. We know how important time is to you, so we'll hopefully try to be efficient with our time. We have a 2-hour block here set up, and our goal is to get out before that. And that depends a little bit on questions that people might have, but we'll try to roll through this. This is our third open house for this Rice Street Visioning project, and unfortunately for all of us, I think our second virtual one. It's been that long. We're at the stage of the project right now where we have 3 different concepts that we want to show, and we're interested in your input as we try to narrow these down to that preferred concept that we really want to detail out. So the purpose of this open house is really twofold. The first is to give you all the project information that we have to date. So we'll be sharing a lot of information tonight, and we'll also be urging you to go online and where there's even more information. And this is all to help you know as much as you possibly can about where we are in this process. And then the other purpose is that we want to hear from you, and we want to get your opinions on the concepts that we're presenting tonight. We want to hear which of these concepts you think will best meet the goals of a revisioned Rice Street. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. And so here's how we've structured the open house to try to do that. And you can switch slides, Nicole. We are going to do a presentation. So we're hoping that that'll take 30 to 40 minutes probably to go through this presentation. And helping me present tonight, we will have Nick Fisher, who is our project manager for Ramsey County. And on the connecting with community piece, we will have Hyla Mays and Juana Sullivan Jansen helping to present that information. And then I will go through some of the design ideas for Rice Street. At that point, we want to pause, and we're going to, Nicole will work her magic, and we will all zoom out to some breakout rooms where we can have hopefully some good discussion. We'll try to split everybody pretty evenly. We'll put some of our technical staff in those breakout rooms as well to answer questions and have a little bit deeper conversation about the various alternatives that we're showing. And so then we will come back and we'll do just a brief report out on what we heard in those breakout rooms, and just a couple of slides on next steps and where we go from here. So at that point, the open house will be over. However, we will be sticking around. You know, if we're done before the 2-hour time period, we'll stick around. If people still have questions, we'll be happy to stick around and answer questions for a while after that. So that's the format of the meeting. And just a couple of quick ground rules. Please stay on mute while we're doing the presentation. There's a lot of people. We're up to nearly 50 people on this call, and so it could be a little bit of chaos. So please remember your mute button. Feel free to use the chat box. We will be monitoring the chat box all the way through this. So if you have questions there during the presentation, feel free to plug them right in there. And we're monitoring that, and you will more than likely get a good answer from one of our staff right away. So please feel free to do that. Burning questions, feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. And we would prefer to just get through this presentation if we can, and then save those questions for the breakout rooms. But if there's something that can't wait, please let us know that. Okay, next slide, and I will now introduce Nick Fisher. Nick is with Ramsey County, and Nick is the county project manager for this.
All right, thanks, Scott. Thanks for the introduction. Again, I am Nick Fisher with Ramsey County. Could we go to the next slide, please? So on the right side there, you'll see a map. The location of this project is on Rice Street between Pennsylvania and Wheelock. Kind of why are we all here? Because everyone has been on Rice Street and can see that it's at the end of its useful life. So it needs to be rebuilt. So we're here to figure out what we need to build. So this area is a diverse mix of residents. So there's homeowners out here, users, so pedestrians, lots of pedestrians, bicyclists, transit users, There's a lot of businesses on this corridor and all modes of travel. What else is happening out here? We need to improve safety for pedestrians and vehicles, and help with community development, business vitality, definitely bike and pedestrian connections, both along the Rice Street and crossing the street, public safety and livability concerns. So there's a lot on our to-do list. So our main end goal is to develop a final plan for Rice Street between those limits. Next slide, please. And we have a lot of other goals too. Public safety. So there's far too many pedestrian, bike, and traffic accidents out here. So working on that as a goal. Promote community investment, maintain transit service. We'll even talk about a BRT line that's coming out here in the future in the upcoming slides. Improve pedestrian safety, so shorter pedestrian crossings, more crosswalks, pedestrian medians, everything's on the table for that. Workforce development, meaning jobs, improve bicycle safety, promote healthy community, provide business support, create an inviting environment, so green space, trees, art, anything to make it more inviting out there. Promote economic development, and of course, improve vehicle safety. Next slide, please. So here's our timeline. We've been in engagement for a long time now, and we'll do public engagement like this until the end, both on this venue and online and in person if we can. Right now, we're kind of wrapping up our preliminary design here very quickly with our final 3 concepts kind of presented today, and then get some comments on that. And very soon we'll be into kind of our final concept and an implementation plan. So coming next year and beyond, figure out how to actually build what the community wants out here. And this is kind of a long corridor. It all won't be built in 1 year. It'll take multiple years, but we need some sort of timeline to figure out how all that's going to go, and that's on our to-do list. And then I'll pass it up. Scott, you got one more thing?
Yeah, just thanks, Nick. Just want to pass it over to Hyla, and Hyla is the lead of our engagement team. We have a fantastic engagement team, which consists of our Bolton and Mink staff from Formula, and staff from Forecast Public Arts, and they'll be helping us out with this engagement piece as well. So Hyla, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Scott. I'm very glad to be here this evening. Next slide. I'm going to do a little bit of background about our strategy and some of the work that's been done to date, and then I'm going to pass it over to Juana to talk about some of the near-term engagement and sort of what we're learning, because I should start by saying it's really important that we think that we're not just listening, but that we're making connections and making sure that the results we're coming with are really representative of the community, representative of what people need here and want here. This strategy slide here just talks. Sorry, can you go back? The strategy slide here just talks through some of the main components of our approach in this engagement process. One is working with the community. This is about community partnerships, individuals, groups, agencies, and all the people who are here who care about this area. We want to make sure that this is something where we're engaging people as directly and interactively as possible. Investing in community institutions. You'll hear about the liaisons and the work they're doing, and a lot of the partnership work is done is to make investments, including physical, financial investments in small ways, to demonstrate that this is about enriching the community, not just showing up and leaving again. Building relationships and capacity. A lot of our focus is, of course, on the near term, getting this right solution for the corridor, but we also want to think the bigger picture. How is this community going to be somewhat stronger, have more capacity to engage in the future, to continue to do work long after this particular window has passed? And again, looking towards the long term in terms of solutions. Some of these things we'll hear a little bit later about how you can deliver things nearer term, hopefully, so that we're not waiting forever for results. At the same time, the full build out of this corridor is going to take some time. And so we have to think about this in stages and what's the right sequencing. Next slide. This is just a sort of summary of a previous phase of engagement. We're in what we're calling phase 3, which is kind of a loose term, but really about the concepts you're going to see tonight. I'm sure what you are all here for. A little bit about the work to date, and I'm not going to go into all these numbers and background pieces, just to let you know that there has been a lot of conversation to date and a lot of feedback in terms of the concepts you're going to see today. We asked a lot of questions around different subsectors of what this corridor is about to sort of suss out what's most important to people on transit, on bike ped, streetscape, vehicle, neighborhood solutions, and other components that make up what this quarter is about. We asked detailed questions and had people participate in a number of different ways. Some of you on here may have been part of that earlier phase to understand better what we want to, what's important, and help people also understand all the things that come into play in this process. Next slide. I'm not going to go into details of this. And for those of you who are data people or interested in this, this is all available on our website as well if you'd like to know more about the background research and the information to date. I was just going to say, we asked in this case different questions around certain elements of the streetscape and certain elements of the corridor, and saying, how do you feel about them? And just before we get to the concepts, how do you feel about this being part of the Rice Street? Does it seem like it's a good fit or not? Not going to detail here, but we had some things that people thought, this is a great idea, we love it here. We have some things people are like, this doesn't seem right. And we had some where there was a kind of a split, where there's a strong opinions and it was almost 50-50 on something. And I'll call it one particular issue, bike facilities, and you'll hear a lot about that later on. That was sort of an issue where we had a lot of different perspectives on multiple sides of that issue. So this told us some things were important, but it also pointed towards the things we're going to need more discussion to sort of make some tough decisions. Next slide. These comment, again, not going to go into these comment themes in detail, but just to say, we had a lot of discussion about what was important to the community. We'll have a top level summary in a moment here, but just a sense of the flavor of what we've heard is a lot of people talking about the importance of prioritizing safety for people walking and biking and traveling through this area, about issues with the way traffic flows today, about when to make sure that there's ways to make sure that cars aren't blazing through here. They need to get through here safely, but that you're not compromising the safety of people along the corridor. That we should spruce up the place, placemaking to make more attractive, more appealing. And that, again, that there's a sense of how this fits into the larger network in terms of bike connectivity, pay connectivity, and of course, the surrounding neighborhoods. I will, at this point, turn it over to Juana to talk about the community liaison component, which has been sort of one of the most, I would say, vibrant parts of our engagement scope, and certainly something where hopefully some of you have had an opportunity to be engaged. So, Juana, want to take it away?
Thanks, Hyla. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Juana Sullivan-Jansen, and I am the coordinator for the Artist Liaison team. In the middle of COVID, you've likely been walking down Rice Street or seen us at a Rice Larpenteur event or at one of the area restaurants. And that was the team polling and asking people what their feelings are and what their hopes are for the future of Rice Street. I'm going to share now what we've been doing since the last open house. The team, which consisted of Melissa Vang, Krista Bayer, Melvin Giles, and Kyle Voigtlander worked together as artists to design an activity book and some postcards that are being distributed to kids and their families in the neighborhood this summer. We've been working continually to form community partnerships to be sure that as we were conducting focus groups or participating in neighborhood events, we were on the radar for organizations that were having activities so that we could be involved. We've also conducted a series of our own focus groups in partnership with area businesses and invited those who attended to choose a gift certificate from one of the area businesses to support them during the COVID pandemic. We spent the winter prepping our brand new mobile engagement vehicle, which you'll see in other slides, and brainstorming about other ways that we'd be able to interact with the community this summer and into the fall. Next slide. So what have we been doing? During the winter, we conducted 3 focus groups, one with area gardeners, another with artists and creative business owners in the area, and another with new residents. This summer, we participated in the Safe Summer Nights youth engagement activity at the Rec Center, the North End Social at Roy Wilkins Park, formerly Lewis Park. And as I mentioned, we've been working to get the brand new Rice Street activity book into the hands of youth in the neighborhood. If you're here tonight and interested in receiving a copy of the activity book, you can check out a number of places in the neighborhood, including the Rice Street Library, the Nino office, popping into any of the North End socials. Catch us when we're riding around the neighborhood in our cart. You can stop by In Progress, the Rec Center, Open Cities Clinic, and a number of other places. If you strike out, as we only printed 500 copies, I'll also tell you to take a pop into the chat and you'll see a link where you can download the activity book online for yourself. After tonight's open house, we'll begin what we're calling a sort of bookend coordination, which means that we'll be working on the ground to literally try to create some engagement tools so that when people are walking up and down Rice Street, they will see that this area is about to change. And they'll have the opportunity to go online and check out the proposals that you'll get to see tonight. And they'll also be able to give feedback there. You'll see we'll drop into the chat a few times over the course of the evening, the link so that you can go in and see what we'll also be discussing in the focus groups in the breakout sessions this evening. In addition to the team that Scott introduced, we'll also be working with Metro Transit, with planning, with Parks and Recreation, and other organizations that are interested in the future of Rice Street. Next slide. This is our mobile engagement cart. You will see us this summer tooling around the neighborhood, possibly blowing bubbles, but absolutely handing out activity books and other tools to invite people to get involved in the process. We will have segments available at Rice and Arlington, Rice and Maryland, Rice and Front/Lawson, and we will continue throughout the summer and into the fall ongoing work with agencies and partner organizations in the area. So what's a high-level takeaway? As we wrap up this process, the things that we know will be important are giving a high priority to safety of pedestrians and traffic safety, particularly at intersections and crosswalks, which are the places where the two come into connection. We're carefully considering what it means to create a Rice Street that is safe for pedestrians, for vehicles, for bicycles, and is also a successful transit facility for those who need to navigate a variety of transportation tools in order to get to their destinations. How can we support the community beyond the roadway? It was the #1 question that people asked when we were doing the engagement on the street. How can the changes in Rice Street help to stimulate economic development in the community, to help to make the businesses here more successful, to contribute to public safety beyond the physical safety of the avenue, and to make the community a more livable space? So it informs the project by inviting pedestrian and traffic safety improvements, bicycle and transit options and enhancements, and community support. Again, don't forget to take a look at all the tools and invite your friends and others that you know in the community to go online and participate in the efforts that they see. And if you're lucky and you catch us in the field, you may just go home with free coloring books, with free coupons for ice cream or gift certificates to any of the area businesses, and ensure that your opinions are a part of the future of the project. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Juana, Hyla, Nick. That's a good overview. And I did want to just give another reminder. I'm going to shift gears now from the engagement piece and the project overview to now talking about alternatives. So please, if you do have questions, throw those in the chat and we will try to respond to them real time. If you have some real serious questions, we can certainly get into those during our breakout sessions, which will be coming up in about 15 minutes or so. So please feel free to do that, and we'll answer those. Before we get into the project alternatives, I do want to really reiterate what Juana just got done saying. We'd really like to drive as much of this traffic as we can to our interactive map and our online tools. This forum here tonight is a really great way to hear from people, but really to get on the project record and really give your input. That is a great place to go. There's a bit more detail than we can do on a small screen here tonight, and there are visuals there for you to take a look at, and you can kind of spend your own time at your own speed making your comments. It's a bit like a social media platform as well, where you can comment on other people's comments. You can support other people's comments. You can rebut other people's comments politely, please. And so we do have that kind of a give and take on that forum as well. Okay, next slide. One of the things that we really started out nearly 2 years ago when we started this process was to say that this is not just a transportation project. This is a Rice Street community project, even though it's coming out of a public works type of project. So on the left side, you see we do have, I'll call them kind of the normal transportation goals that you see, and these follow the expressed planning principles of both Ramsey County and the city of St. Paul, providing safe pedestrian accommodations, providing safe bicycle connections, improved transit service, safe traffic operations, and welcoming streetscape. So those play very heavily into our evaluation of the concepts and alternatives that we've developed. On the other hand, that's not the only thing we're looking at here. So we are really trying to dig deep into the community context as well. So the goals on the right side that you see that we're weighing our alternatives against are things like economic development. How do people in the neighborhood, how do we develop workforce? What is a healthy community, and how does a project like this contribute to a healthy community? Public safety, Nick mentioned earlier. And on this side of the ledger, it's not just crashes and safety issues on transportation. It's public safety of everyone all the time. And then what are the community defined goals? We asked, and those were incorporated into our evaluation criteria as well. So the next slide. Another thing we wanted to recognize that we have about a 2-mile corridor here. We're just 2 miles of Rice Street, but that's a lot. And I think you all know Rice Street pretty well, and you know that kind of the character of Rice Street changes a little bit up and down the line. So while we're looking at concepts for this corridor, we didn't want to just assume that one size concept would fit the whole corridor. So we really looked at different segments within this corridor, and if you think a little bit about it, going from south to north, Pennsylvania to Atwater is kind of defined by the railroad crossing. It's a little more industrial and manufacturing in nature. It's kind of its own segment. When you go from Atwater up to Maryland, it's really a commercial district, buildings close in. It's got its own character. From Maryland up to the railroad to the north of Ivy, I believe, it's got a little bit different character. You see some residential popping into the corridor in that area. Plus there's also some commercial. And then from the railroad north to Wheelock, it gets to be a little bit more suburban-like in nature with parking, buildings set back from the right-of-way, parking lots abutting the right-of-way. So it's a little bit different also. So we wanted to recognize that there could be different solutions for these different types of segments that we have. So next slide. You probably don't need a reminder of what Rice Street is today because you're all very, very familiar with it. But one thing that we did want to acknowledge with this is today it's a 4-lane road. And a couple of things I want to really point out on this drawing that we have here. It's 4 lanes in each direction, as you know. In certain locations, that outside lane becomes a parking lane at certain times of the day, creates some confusion, creates some little more erratic traffic patterns, and has certainly contributed to the high crash history that we have out here. Another thing I want to point out is if you look at the sidewalk space on either side of the roadway, it's approximately the same. It's not entirely uniform the whole stretch, but it's pretty close. There's a 6-foot sidewalk abutting the right-of-way on either side, and then there's a 4-foot boulevard that you see there. And I want to talk just about that boulevard for just a second, because that becomes a very important piece to us in the design process as we move forward. That boulevard, we kind of refer to it as flex space. It's needed for a couple of things. We need a place, as you see in this drawing, we need a place to put lights. We need a place to put fire hydrants. We need a place to put signs, traffic signs and other signs. And so there's utility in that space. But we also want to acknowledge and want you to remember that as we think about that space, in the locations where there's not a sign or there's not a light pole or other kind of infrastructure feature within that space can be used for something else. So it can become a 10-foot sidewalk. It can become a green rain feature. It can become green grass. It can become something else. Benches, bike racks. There are many things that can be used for. Art. So it becomes a space that becomes part of the sidewalk. So the combination of what the sidewalk is and what that flex space is can be really important to these alternatives. And then the last thing I'll say about this is one thing that our project team came to the realization of fairly early on when we looked at just the technical data, crash history for both vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles, is this 4-lane roadway within this 66-foot right-of-way is really not an option here. So what you will see as we develop, as I show you these concepts, is we've gone away from the 4-lane segment, and all of the concepts that we have to show will have a 3-lane segment in them, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in a second. So move on to concept A. So just a little bit of history. If you were at the last open house or have been engaged with us over the last, call it 9 months or so, you'll know that we started out with about 7 alternatives, not about 7 alternatives, exactly 7 alternatives, different concepts. And we vetted those publicly. And that was a lot of the data that you saw that Hyla showed. We asked about those concepts. We evaluated them against our evaluation criteria. And we are now down to these 3 concepts that you will be seeing right now. And as I mentioned, all of the concepts, if you look within the curb line, they're all the same. They're all a 3-lane roadway. In other words, 1 lane in each direction with a center turn lane that is available for left turners. So concept A that you're looking at here, the main theme of this concept is that it incorporates a 2-way separated bike lane within that 66-foot right-of-way. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of what that means and what that feels like. So you'll see on the left side there, if you start at the left right-of-way line, there's a 6-foot sidewalk. And then there's a small barrier. I believe that's a 1-foot barrier that you need to separate a sidewalk from a bike path. And then there's an 8-foot separated bike lane. And that leaves about 5 feet, which we consider to be the minimum that we need for that flex zone that I talked about earlier, that again can be flexible in its use, but absolutely needs to have light poles and traffic signs and various things like that, various infrastructure elements to it. So that's what happens on the west side. There's a 2-way 8-foot separated bike path on the west side. On the east side, about all that we have left room for is a 5-foot boulevard and a 6-foot sidewalk. And if you think back to what the existing is, we today have a 4-foot sidewalk and a 4-foot flex zone and a 6-foot sidewalk. So we really haven't improved much on the right side, on that east side. We really haven't improved much on that pedestrian condition. On the west side, we still have the same 6-foot sidewalk. Again, not improving much on that pedestrian condition, but we do have a separated bike facility on that. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide, which is an actual visualization of that. So we took that concept and said, what would that look like? And this is actually at Montana Avenue. So you see it's at Montana looking north. So you see the McDonald's on the left side there. And just kind of behind you to the right and behind is the parks. The ball fields are sitting right there. And so this is an example of what that would kind of look and feel like. And we do want to note that this is very preliminary. This is a very high level look, and it's not fully designed out. We're showing the, if you go from the left to right, we're showing the 6-foot sidewalk there. We have the 8-foot bike lane and the flex zone beyond that. And this is showing an example of the kind of detail we will be getting into later in the middle of the road. Without a street going to the west there, we could potentially put a median in for crossing. So that would provide for, the ball fields are here, the McDonald's is on the other side, that would provide for a 2-stage crossing. You only need to look one direction at a time, and there's refuge in the middle to be able to make a safer crossing there. Again, that's just an example of what one of those might look like. And as we get into the preferred and start to get down in a block, street by street, block by block analysis of all these, we'll work through some of those details. Next slide. So the pros and the cons of Concept A. The pros are, it does provide a dedicated bicycle facility that connects to a lot of regional and local connections. And that type of facility is an all ages and abilities bicycle network. It's very comfortable to ride on. It doesn't mix traffic. There's an increased buffer between that sidewalk and the vehicle lanes. So there's a lot of good to say about that. I see a comment about parking. I'll address that in a little bit. So thanks for that. On the con side, there is it's a real challenge fitting this in a 66-foot right of way. In fact, essentially what we had to do with every element from sidewalk to bike path to roadway is narrow everything down to the barest minimums that good practice will allow. And so it fits very, very tightly in there. We also want to acknowledge there are maintenance issues regarding snow storage. We're using every inch of that right of way out there. And as we know, snow has to go somewhere. It's the least likely to accommodate parking. There would be parking available in a scenario like this. And again, I'll address that in a little bit. Essentially, the way parking is addressed in all of these concepts is we're showing the straight curb lines down. Parking would be cut into that flexible space, that flex zone. And I mentioned just absolute minimum bikeway widths because there's only so many feet within that 66-foot right of way, and we're unable to provide more width for either bikes or pedestrians or the vehicles. Bicycles, of course, are only on one side of the street. It's a two-way cycle track on one side of the street, so they would have to cross to get to the other side of the street. And then with the real squeezing of this, it really limits our opportunities for those kinds of amenities and green infrastructure that could help aesthetically out here and help really kind of make a place special. So those are the cons of a bike lane. In other words, it's really, really tight, if you didn't hear me say that 6 times. Next concept. And do keep the chat comments coming. We will address those as we move along. Okay, the second concept, concept B, instead of this is a bicycle alternative as well. Instead of a dedicated bicycle, two-way bicycle lane, we have a 12-foot shared use path. And shared use means pedestrians and bicycles are legally able to go on that path. It's safe and acceptable for both. So when you look at this concept, I won't spend much time in the road because as I mentioned, it's exactly the same. 11-foot through lanes, 10-foot two-way left turn lane, and 11-foot through lane. What we're able to do with this is we get wider on the east side. We show a 6-foot boulevard and a 12-foot shared use path. And on the east side, I did say west side, didn't I? On the east side, we get a little bit wider as well, 6-foot boulevard and a 6-foot sidewalk there. So it starts to widen out a little bit more. In other words, this bicycle accommodation takes up a little bit less room than a sidewalk and a bicycle path by combining them. And so everything else other than the roadway can get a little bit wider, a little more comfortable. Next slide. And this is what that would look like in an artist's rendering at Ivy. So towards the north end. And you'll see that the 12-foot shared use path is on that far west side. And we've got the flex zone next to it as well. I'm just looking at my widths. So there's a 12-foot shared use path, 6-foot boulevard there. So that's 18 feet of total space on that side. And on the east side, there's a 6-foot boulevard and a 6-foot sidewalk. So it's about 12 feet compared to today's 10 feet on the east side. And we simply showed an example of this is a residential area on one side. Just simply showed an example of you could put grass in a flex zone like that. Perhaps perhaps that would be desirable in a residential area. We'll make decisions like that later. But that flex zone is available for things like that. Next slide. So pros, this does accommodate bikes, but it doesn't take quite as much space as Concept A. It is more compatible with transit because it provides more room, and I'm going to talk about transit here in a little bit too. It provides more room for a potential arterial bus rapid transit line. So if you hear me say BRT, that's what I'm talking about, bus rapid transit. It is more compatible with that transit line, and it does increase the boulevard space for those kinds of amenities that I just talked about, potential green infrastructure, tables, benches, bike racks, things like that. It does increase that space to do things. On the con side, mixing pedestrian and bike traffic does create some potential issues in those shared space. Shared use paths are an acceptable way to do that, but it's not as good for the bicyclist as their own space. Okay, let's hit the next one. Concept C. This gets into no bikeway. So this is a no bikeway option. It's basically the enhanced pedestrian option. So rather than carving out space for a bikeway, what this does is take all of that space. Again, the roadway space is the same. It takes all of that space and allocates it to boulevard or flex space and sidewalk. So in this case, we're showing a 8-foot sidewalk and a 7-foot boulevard on both sides. So you have about 15 feet of space to work with, which is much more comfortable for many things that would want to fit in there. And if you go to the next slide, the pros and cons of that. Oh yeah, this is Winnipeg. So we're down on the south end at Winnipeg. And you can see here, I'm going to touch briefly on parking before I hit it again a little bit later. You can see here on the far west side, the left side of this, that's the same as the right side. You've got that 8-foot sidewalk and 7-foot flex space. So there's 15 feet there, very comfortable pedestrian environment. And then I wanted to just show on that east side, on the right side, this is what it would look like when you cut a parking bay into that flex zone. So I mentioned if you go from the building face, 8-foot sidewalk, then a 7-foot flex space. If you take all 7 feet of that flex space and the 18 inches of the curb and gutter area, you can fit an 8-foot sidewalk, or excuse me, an 8-foot parking bay in there. And so I'll talk about that in a little bit. And if you go to the next slide, this one is the most likely to accommodate the most parking. It's a somewhat wider pedestrian realm from 12 feet up to 15 feet. So that does give more room for other things that might want to be put within that right of way. Con side is the obvious one. There is no dedicated bike facility, which has been identified as a project priority here. Okay, Next. Wanted to just touch on the transit aspects, and I know we've got I believe we've got Doug Cook from Metro Transit on the call as well. So welcome, Doug. Happy to have you here. So I think most of you know that the Rice Robert line has now been advanced and is now called the G line. And we list the stations here that are at this time just planned. They're not a given. At this time, what we are coordinating with the G line planners. They are part of our project management team, and actual planning for the G line should probably start about this time next year. They're anticipating construction in it's not nailed down yet, but in the 2027 to 2030 timeframe. So we're a little bit ahead of it, ahead of that project, but we've got that project team coordinating with us. So we are accommodating potential future transit stations within our project. And the last thing I'll say about the transit is, as you look at BRT stations, there's a desire for a 12-foot space for transit stations for the BRT. They have to put infrastructure there at pedestrian mixing zones. And within Concept A, that is the hardest to accommodate. It's very, very hard. In fact, with Concept A, which is the separated bicycle facility, we do not have the space to take a bicycle facility around the back of the transit station. So what we've designed within that concept is we stop the separated bicycle lane, we turn it into a shared use bicycle lane for that several hundred feet right behind the transit station. Then it goes back to a two-way bicycle lane beyond the transit station. So that's an example of how tight it is and how we're trying to fit a lot within that tight space. Okay, next slide. So we do have some issues to address as we get into the final designs of how this will actually work. The first and foremost and the biggest is just the space. It's very constrained. We know we have trade-offs for what fits, and that's why we've been very careful and very deliberate in the coordination with all the project partners. Alana mentioned them earlier, the city parks, Metro Transit. So we've got a lot of good partners in here, really all working very hard to try to come up with the best design that we can. So when you think about the priority of that, we go back to our goals and try to figure out what the most important goals are there. I mentioned earlier, G line, just fitting the BRT stations in the right locations. And again, just want to stress that Metro Transit has not started their planning process just yet. So all we have to date are kind of these very high level assumed station locations. Another thing I wanted to touch on is the timing of this. Again, it's a 2-mile long corridor that we're looking at. We do not anticipate that we would have one project come in and redo it all at one time. So the part of the next phase will be, what is the timing? What happens first? What can we implement first? How can we implement all of it? And what is that time frame? So that's a big question, will require a lot of work and input from people as well. And then, of course, the devil is always in the details. As we get down to an intersection by intersection look at this final concept that we settle on, there are a lot of details, and we will need to be very, very close touch with the owners of businesses, properties along along the whole corridor. And so there will be a lot of work to do just to nail those details down. Next one. So we did want to just simply acknowledge that this is a really hard decision, because in the ideal world, we've got enough space and we could put in everything that everybody wants. But what we have done to date is really recognizing what all those needs are. So we've developed kind of that list of what is it that everybody would like to see out here. And we're going down the list: pedestrian space, a dedicated bike facility, how the DRT fits in, and parking, which I've teed up a couple of times. I'll promise you it's the next slide, so I'll get to that in just a moment. And so for that, we definitely want to prioritize the various modes and try to give the best experience to the highest priority modes. So that's how we're approaching this. We've got a list of criteria that is incredibly long to evaluate these alternatives against, and that work is happening right now. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So just a quick review, and with the ability to put parking in. We did a parking study. It was fall of 2019. So it was before the pandemic. We would like to do some more, another look at parking out there, but of course there hasn't been a chance over the last year plus because traffic patterns changed so much. We think we may have an opportunity to do another scan this fall, perhaps when school starts, and perhaps we all hope things are a little bit more back to normal, and do another assessment of parking. Concept A, I mentioned, is the one that is the tightest, and there are limited opportunities for parking bays out there. So if you think about the space that's on either side of the road, about the only opportunity for parking would be on the east side of the street, because we've got the sidewalk and the bike path on the west side of the street. And our flex space with that alternative is not wide enough to accommodate one full parking lane. So essentially what we have to do is do some shifting on the west side of the street to get the space on the east side of the street. And so the ability to do that is much more limited where we have street connections coming in. We have to have pedestrian lighting space. That taking that flex space takes the pedestrian lighting space as well. So we have to have lights on either side of it. So it's really detailed, and it really is a very limited opportunity for parking bays on that concept A. Concept B does give us more ability to do that, and it's because the space that's available on that east side is greater in B. And so we have just about enough room to create a parking bay there. We still have to move around a little bit, but we will be able to put more parking bays in that concept B. Concept B becomes the most flexible for parking. So if you think about the flex, concept C, if I think I said B, concept C becomes more available because there's already a 7-foot boulevard on both sides. And so you can actually cut a parking bay into either side at that point. So it becomes more available, and the ability to put more parking back is with concept B. Of course, Rice Street and parking on Rice Street is not the only opportunity to park out here. Many businesses have off-street parking. There's side street available. So we're reviewing those shared parking possibilities as well. And did want to also acknowledge just simply the debate going on at the city right now about parking in general, because that is an issue that's being raised, has been raised in Minneapolis, it's been raised in St. Paul now, and that debate is going on at the city council about just how much parking do you actually need. So we want to acknowledge we're in kind of a debate that's in flux right now, related to parking. So the intent would be, as we go into the next phase, we would get down on a block by block spot, talk to property owners about parking, and put parking where it's wanted and needed, with the ability to do that, and not put parking where it's not wanted or needed. So that's our goal for the next phase. And then I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes before we go into our breakout rooms on just the overall corridor context. because we talked earlier about, yes, this is coming out of Public Works. It's a street road type of project, but we want to acknowledge everything else that is going on and everything that wants to go on Rice Street. So to supplement the technical piece of this, we are using a number of tools that we have to get at things like, how does this affect business and retail? What happens within the residential areas? We know there are a lot of areas here where children are present, and that is one of the big safety concerns that we have. Do they have safe routes to be able to traverse along Rice Street as well as cross Rice Street when they need to? The various destinations and nodes out here are real assets to this community. We want to make sure they're safe, accessible, and attractive beyond just the street and the pavement. And so our plan is we're going plan by plan or segment by segment through here, trying to determine how we do that on every block along this corridor. Next one. This is just it's very similar to the segment I showed you earlier. We're going through a very detailed and rigorous assessment of just the character within these so that we can inform all those other things. I'm seeing somebody saying the presenter is mute. Are people hearing me? Okay, good. So there may be something technical on somebody else's end. So what we're doing is we're assessing, again, within these various different areas with different character, what are the special needs that go beyond, again, just the street and the sidewalks? And who do we need to communicate with so that things that are outside of Public Works control, those things happen as well. And we've received some pretty enthusiastic response from other departments about that as well. And so next slide. So we are developing really a framework for livability within this. And we want to bring this implementation plan for this livability framework right along with the implementation plan for how Nick is going to develop these transportation projects over time. This is just as important as that. And so we want to make sure that we carry this through that process. It's given its due. And so we'll look at roadway and transportation improvements, of course, but beyond that, get into what is the urban design? What's happening with development and land use? How do we make this place a place that people are proud of? What's the public realm look like? Also, business support. We know jobs are an issue. So how do we create jobs in here? How do we help people? And then I mentioned earlier the public health, bikes and walking, a great way to encourage public health. Links to parks, links to other links in the system as well for the regional system. Those are things that can be assets to this community. So with that, we're going to go to our breakout sessions now. And we really want to, I wasn't able to follow along with the chat, so I hope things are getting answered there, and things that haven't been answered yet, let's talk about in our breakout room. And Nicole will be assigning everybody a breakout room. And Nicole, do you have any last minute instructions for us?
Nope, I set the timer for 20 minutes, so
Okay.
you won't have to do anything. It will pull you into the room, and then after 20 minutes, I think there will be a minute warning before that ends, and then it will automatically pull us all back into the main room. So you won't have to do anything. You might have to just click a button to go to the room, but I can take us away right now if we're all ready.
Sorry, Nicole, before we go, there was a question at the very end here that might be worth mentioning, answering briefly about handicap accessibility as a component of this project. Could you address that briefly, Scott?
Yeah, that is a great question, because when we talk about the pedestrian realm, that's one of the most important pieces of that. ADA accessibility is a main feature of this. Every intersection will be designed to be accessible. And so absolutely, that's one of the most important pieces of this in terms of people being able to move comfortably through this corridor. So thanks for that question. That actually is incredibly important. I apologize for not mentioning that earlier. I absolutely should have. Okay, Nicole, you want to
Yep.
fire us away?
All right. We'll be back in 20 minutes.
Join. This is when you gotta be careful what you say.
Hey, Nicole, I was in group 2
Okay, should I move you back in there?
Nicole, I was in a breakout room. Could you put me in breakout room 2?
Nicole, this is Brian Nemeth. If you have a chance, some of the comments, we were not able to see other people's comments on the input ID. Just to let you know.
Okay.
Do we know if everybody's back, Nicole?
We have a few people still popping in, but we should all be back together by now. So we're free to move on.
All right, let's go ahead and move on. Who is group one? Who's reporting back on that?
That was Cody. I think that was our group, right?
Yes.
Great. I can report back on that. We had a really great group of people who introduced themselves and some definite distinct opinions. We heard from a couple people who were concerned that bike lanes on the corridor may not be used as heavily as to justify the amount of space dedicated for them. There was concerns that they did not see a lot of bike traffic on there right now. I think there are other alternatives. And of course, the space was very constrained, which we're all aware of. We also had the counterpoint argument, which was saying, well, maybe one of the reasons we don't see bike traffic is because it's not considered safe right now. It doesn't feel comfortable for people to ride, so they avoid the corridor. And that because of it's been, as far as the All Ages and Abilities Network, there's a reason to create a more safe environment for people along this corridor to bike. Definitely different opinions there, but it's good to hear from different perspectives. We also had some discussion about parking and the fact that there's some need perceived for on-street parking, especially for delivery and for businesses that do not have adequate off-street parking. And some questions related to just dimensions and requirements on that, and a little bit about the understanding that there will be some opportunities for bus pullouts because buses often will otherwise block traffic. Cody, did I miss anything major?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay, great.
All right, thanks, Hyla. Group two is our group. Nick, you want to report out on that?
Sure, I can do my best here. The first suggestion was make it 2 lanes rather than 3, because the smaller the better. There was another person who liked option B the best. Another suggestion, which was a good one, is have option A, so the bike designated bikeway on both ends where it's wider, and then option B where it's a shared use path in the middle where there's not as much space, and that's a very good suggestion. Another one is kind of add some curvature to Ray Street or chicane, so it's not just a straight shot and slows people down. That's a good suggestion. Another one was add a bike lane on a side street and trash cans along the street, which is a great idea. And there was another comment on a lot of accidents near the Wheelock intersection.
Yeah, that fits my list. So I think that's it for us. Group 3. Is that Alyssa?
Brian.
I'll start and let
Brian
Brian jump in. I want to thank our group. Several people lived right on the corridor or near the corridor, and several people were from a little bit further away, but brought their concerns from experience on other corridors in the area. So we found that people are very concerned about businesses and supporting the businesses, including facilitating parking and deliveries for some of those businesses. We heard about a lot about housing and density and maybe what will an improved Rice Street attract, and how that will play out amongst the larger community. And then there was a question about property tax for the area. Is it for the area? Is it going to be for the overall county? We had some walkers. We had some people that said they walked in the area. A lot of people said that several people mentioned that they use Rice quite often, and several people said they would use Rice more often
once improvements were made. So I will let Brian tag out along onto that if there's anything else.
Yeah, the other things, is encourage us to talk to the businesses and to determine where, there is a need for parking, or if there are opportunities for parking to be made off site or off the roadway corridor. Looking and talking to those businesses is encouraged, which is very good comment. And just, comparisons to Maryland Avenue, I think was the other comments we got, is just, how this corridor compares to that. And, I think there were some positive and negative, a lot more negative, I would say, that we heard from, at least from the group that we had, or certain couple people that, that what was happening on Maryland, want to make sure that, that something is provided for the community, provided on something like Rice Street. That's about it.
Thanks, Brian. And thanks to everybody in the breakout groups. What I'm going to do now is I've basically got just one more slide to go through. So I'm gonna do that, and then we're going to open it up. So the next steps, we are basically starting today about call it a 30-day comment period. And again, I want to stress, I can't stress enough, please go to the website, and that will be open for quite a while for people's comments. And I would encourage you to check back in, because as I mentioned, there's the kind of the chat feature, and you can weigh in, you can talk to your neighbors about what's going on there and other interested parties. And really appreciate you doing that. So at the end of that 30-day comment period, we will be making a decision about which of these various concepts fit which of the segments that we have, and we'll be coming up with one that we think meets the goals of people here and people that weigh in online and people that have weighed in over the last nearly 2 years. We will continue our outreach. Hyla and Joanna mentioned some targeted outreach coming up yet this summer and fall, so we will continue that. And our intent would be to report back on this with a preferred concept this fall. I don't want to kind of nail that down to a date yet, but if I had to, it'd be somewhere around October-ish probably. We'll try to bring this back to people because, as I mentioned, we got a lot of work to do on trying to figure out how to fit parking in, where do medians go? Are there short stretches that we can actually do some real changes to side streets that will help things? So there's a lot of details to be gone through yet. And so there's the implementation piece on the, how do you implement the roadside, as well as the implementation piece. How do the community aspects of that come right along with that? So we've got a lot of work to do over the next few months. And we hope to report back in fall about where we are and what we intend to do out here and how we intend to do it. So those are the next steps. And as I mentioned earlier, we'd more than happy. It's 7:30 now. We're more than happy to stick around for a little while longer if people do have continued questions. Recognizing that everybody's already given an hour and a half of their evening. Again, thank you very much. We appreciate your feedback. This is incredibly important to us. So I'm going to stop there, and I will open it up, and people can chat. People can raise your hand and make comments, and be happy to just have kind of a general free flow, kind of like we did in the breakouts. Any comments or questions?
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
One thing that happened in our breakout group that we perhaps didn't bring forward because it felt like it was more of a happenstance was one of the people in our group mentioned having kids in the neighborhood knock on his door to ask if he could move his car so that they could play a game in the street, because it wasn't safe for them to go across Rice Street to the rec center. And then another person talked about gardeners expressing concern about risk of injury. And so I just want to be sure that everyone hears that for all ages, the pedestrian question, how do we allow people to safely cross the street, is one that people are consistently raising. And then there was a question of, can we do something about the speed through design? And if so, what does that look like? And how does that impact the drivers, the cyclists, and the buses?
Thanks, Alana. Yep, those are important aspects. Just again, we are formally done here, so if you have places to be, feel free to do that. If you do have some questions, we'll stick around and chat a little bit if you'd like.
Hey Scott, this is Lee again.
Yeah, Lee.
I don't know if this is a question, but this is just my experience, right? So for me here, I live in Rice for almost 20 years, and I like to bike to work. And I mainly get down to the train station at university to get to work. I feel more comfortable using that trail behind Kmart to get to downtown than going straight down on Rice Street to university there. That's just my concern. If I'm able to feel comfortable riding my bike down to university to get to the train, that would be great.
Great, thanks, Lee. It's a real life example.
So I'm on the Input ID website right now, and I can see some like icons where other people have left comments, but when I click on them, it just gives me like a thumbs up, thumbs down, leave my own comment on that, but I can't see what they commented. So that might be something that whoever's on the back end should look into.
Yep. Brian let me know after the breakout session, and I already messaged our designer for this, so hopefully that's resolved shortly here. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, Ian.
You know, I wonder if it's because they have to be approved before they're visible for someone else. So we need to read them and make sure they're okay. And then after that, everyone else will be able to see them. Because people are putting things in right now, you likely won't be able to see what someone just put in tonight.
So apparently Ramsey County has community standards. Is that correct? That's a good thing.
One can only assume.
And one can hope. Other questions? Appreciate you coming, Commissioner Matas Castillo. You probably had 7 other meetings you could have gone to. We appreciate you choosing this one. So thanks for coming.
I think it's worth reading her message, Scott, just in case somebody can't see it.
Yeah.
Do you want to read that aloud?
Will do. She says, thanks everyone for coming and participating tonight. This was a really great and valuable conversation, and we're going to keep talking as this moves forward. We're not going to make everyone happy, but I know we can create a project that meets the community's needs and lives up to our values as a city and a county. Well said.
You know, there were a number of people, I'm sorry, this is Mickey Murray. There were a number of people who made comments regarding business. And I know the various sessions I've been in, for the most part, have been residential input. And so have there been meetings? I'm thinking people will be interested to know if there have been meetings that have been specifically addressing or asking for business interests and concerns.
Yeah, great question. And was it Mickey?
Yes.
Yeah. We have met with NEBA, the Northeast Business Association, a couple of times. We met with them just recently, although I will say it was kind of as we were coming out of, people starting to get vaccinations, and it was not greatly attended. I think that's a great comment, and we need to go back to NEBA. I know that our liaisons are getting out in the community and hearing from some of the business owners as well as they work with them. But I appreciate that comment. You're absolutely right. We have we have professed that economic development and the vitality of Rice Street is incredibly important in this conversation. So hearing from them is definitely needed. So we will redouble our efforts to contact NEBA and visit with them again as well.
There are a couple of comments regarding suggestions or ideas about moving the bike corridor, along Jackson Street. And so there's a little bit of conversation going back and forth, and I think that it's worth putting on input ID. And I think that I think the larger area is being looked at, and I think some, at the PMT level, the project management team, working with our partners at the county and, the different departments in the county and the city and whatnot, trying to find some suggestions or some solutions.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yep, and also on the county's list to do is a bike facility on Jackson Street from pretty much Larpenteur to University all the way down. So
I'll mirror what Trista has just commented here, which is that folks on bikes often like getting to restaurants and shops and homes that are on Rice Street. So a bike lane on Jackson does add a bit and perhaps would be good in its own right. But I think that there's real reasons to allow the folks that live and work and bike on Rice Street to access the same shops and businesses and homes.
yeah, I'd see Jackson as more of a commuter route and Rice Street more as I'm going to eat there, drink there, have fun there.
Good comments. So I sit here for 15 seconds. That means nobody's going to say anything, and we're going to
Thank you all
pull
very
the
much.
plug.
This was very informative. Thank you so much. And thank
Yeah.
you for walking through the website.
That's great.
And it looks
Good.
like the comments are showing up in input ID now. I think it was, like Hawana said, with a little bit of back end screening before those appeared live.
Excellent. Glad to know it works. All right, I think we'll wrap it up here, and you know where to find us. We're not hard to find, so Nick's right there on the website. Any questions, feel free to reach out to Nick. And again, just make sure you comment on the website. We'd love to get the comments there. We did record this. We have everything recorded from tonight, so that's a good thing. Any last comments, Nick?
Nope, this is a great group, and we'll see you again in probably a couple months.
Thanks all.
Nice job, Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
job, Scott. You're getting better and better.
I learned from some of the best, Melvin.
Okay, you take care.
Yeah, we'll see you.
Bye-bye.